When I was first sworn in as mayor of San Jose, a friend of mine who had been confined to a wheelchair all of his life came to me and asked me if that first week as mayor, if I would stay in a wheelchair as much as possible. I had the wheelchair in the back of the car, take it out, get in, go into City Hall. I'd fall on my butt. I couldn't get up over the curb, couldn't go to the bathroom, couldn't get to the water fountain. When people were talking about putting the Americans with Disabilities Act together, they asked me if I would put together the transportation portion of that bill. To me, it was a great period because it gave me an opportunity to work with President George H.W. Bush and with Justin Dart, who was the chair of President Bush's Commission for those with disabilities. And to me, that was a real honor and privilege to spend time with all these organizations in putting the ADA together. Senator Inoue, Senator Matsunaga, the late Congressman Bob Matsui, and I got together and we were wondering, what are we going to do now with this one sentence resolution from the National Japanese American Citizens League? I had a legislative director who would set up the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians. In 1980, that commission report came out, and it said that it was a gross injustice in terms of what happened to those of Japanese ancestry, and said that it was due to wartime hysteria, historical racial prejudice, and weak political leadership. They concluded that Congress should apologize on behalf of the United States of America and pay redress payments. So we put all of that into legislative language, which was the Civil Liberties Act. President Reagan signed that bill, so it became known as the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. The Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act. People were trying to get more power to the states and local governments on what kind of highway projects or transit projects would be constructed. I spent a great deal of time putting that together. So it was a monumental piece of legislation. I would look at the success of the Congressional Black Caucus or the Hispanic Caucus and think we don't have a caucus that looks out after the interests of Asian Pacific Islanders. And so I called on not only Asian Pacific American members of Congress, but more importantly, those congressional districts across the country where you would have a relatively large Asian Pacific American population. I also set up at the same time an organization outside of Congress, today known as the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies. I think it has done a lot of good in terms of education and health issues. I think we've made a great deal of an advance in those areas. Under President Clinton, when I was Secretary of Commerce, and under President Bush, when I was Secretary of Transportation, I always looked at it in terms of what we had to do in our departments so that we could answer to the Congress of how we were meeting the goals set by Congress. Whether it was as a member of the City Council, mayor, a member of Congress, or an executive branch, always trying to figure out where is that path that gives you the greater good. So I've always hoped that I could end up with people looking at me in terms of what I've done over the years. I was talking to my dad And he said, you know, I always wanted all of you children to be active in the community, but I never expected anyone to be in political office. And he said in Japanese, there's an old adage about if you're in politics, you're going to be like the nail sticking out on a board. And he said, you know what happens to that nail? It always gets hammered. I think I encourage people to be like that nail sticking out on the board.